Hi, welcome to The Pursuit of Truth. So this one I wanted to take a different tack on the Ukraine war. I know I've mentioned it throughout the last few videos anyway, but I wanted to be more about this rather than the hypocrisy of the West and its meddlings in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and how they did nothing for Crimea, I guess because it wasn't on the border. The difference in how people are treated, when they're now talking about how they bombed Syria, but there was no sanctions against them then, but when it's Europeans, then it's different. That all set aside, that's all politics and etc. But that the real suffering here, humanity-wise, is the Ukrainian people. And seeing these images recently on Sky News of these kids being moved about in train, 1 million people dispersed from Ukraine to Poland and other areas. To think of how it must be if it was you, and that's why, a lot of people are thinking that, I'm against war, but a lot of people are thinking that, should we be doing something to stop this? Or is it going to escalate into World War III? Even if we don't do anything, is this like the beginning of the Second World War when nothing was done? But yeah, if you imagine, like I imagine with my twins and my older daughter and my wife, how it must be if you had to move out, travel. Yeah, for once trains are free. I assume no one's getting to have to pay for everything. It's amazing how when these things happen, like pandemics and wars, how money doesn't become important. What a shame we can't do that all the time. Have this spirit of humanity that's during wars and pandemics, but all the time. So much humanity could do if that was the case. And then I was seeing that recently there were people where they were filming tanks outside. Imagine how that must have been. It's impossible for us to imagine in say the UK, unless you're old enough to, even in the Second World War, there wasn't any tanks in England from Germany. They never got that far. But obviously if you're European, like French or those kinds of countries, you would know what it feels like. But imagine what it feels like to know that you're looking outside your window, your whole life has changed. 1 minute you were just doing shopping or going to work or whatever, and the next you're in a war zone and there's a tank outside and you don't really know whether they're shooting people indiscriminately. There's a lot of civilian targets that seem to be getting hit. I know that's nothing new in war, that's happened in Iraq and Syria in the Second World War. Unfortunately, that's why I don't like war, is because it doesn't just affect the military people, it affects civilians, because those targets always get hit, and especially if it's a country that's it's country fighting for itself without help. I do think in the future this will be looked back on in a moment where the West, rather than clapping and doing economic sanctions, maybe should have helped, because it verges on the only aspect of war that I believe is legitimate, is a defensive war. I don't believe Iraq and Afghanistan was a defensive war. The Second World War, based on the history that I know, it does seem to be that it was a defensive war. I know there's issues of power and all that kind of stuff, and whether that was really to play. But this, I know Russia has its claims of Minsk and its claims of US influence and that kind of stuff, but I do think in the future people will look back at this and maybe we should have done something at the beginning, because who knows where this is going to lead to now. We may all be looking out our windows soon at tanks, or the fear of that. Then there's the people that conspiratorial views that this is all staged. I don't know how that would be possible, but I get it, because it seems convenient, because now COVID has gone out the window. I don't know, but I just feel for the people that are living in this war, or that they didn't choose. Imagine if it was you. But what this all comes down to, in the system, this is just part of the system, But if you look at things truthfully, like I've been talking about, if we lived in a world where we didn't cut up the countries and names and all that kind of stuff, we wouldn't have these things. If we didn't have money, if everyone had a house, everyone had the ability to do everything that we should be able to do, a free world, then we wouldn't have wars, we wouldn't have tyranny, we wouldn't have dictators, because there would be no need for it. Anyway, I've written a poem, They Die by Day, They Die by Night. I'm going to put it later. Yeah, it's just quite depressing, really, seeing these images and what's happening to people and what's going to happen, and whether humanity will ever wise up to the fact that we're all brethren of each other, we're all humans, and all these things that we're fighting for, like land and money and power and all that, are all illusionary and man-made concepts from people thousands of years that cut up this free place we found ourselves upon. I don't know, maybe this will make people step up and think. The only good thing is now with computers and cameras and satellites, everything is available to see. All war crimes, they're being picked up now. I mean, it's lucky this technology wasn't around during Iraq and Afghanistan. Be interested in what would have happened, whether there would have been the sanctions against the West. But then who would sanction them when everything like NATO and all that kind of stuff is, and SWIFT and all that is mainly run by Europeans and Americans? So it's part of that hypocrisy and a part of the power and the system, and the people who suffer aren't the big people, it's the little people, the innocent people who may not want this to happen. It's humanity that's suffering, really, because we're wasting our time, as usual, fighting each other over a bit of land that everyone lives and everyone dies. No one can hold on to it. You can't possess something that we're not immortal. So it's just another waste of effort and humanity when we could be doing things to actually benefit humanity. But this will only change once we change the system of this idea, this small-scale idea of bordering ourselves up in these different ways. Take it easy. God bless. Peace.